Now, Ben, let's welcome you to the program. And well, what are we talking about here? UCL, what have they been up to with respect to climate change and net zero?
Quite a lot, it would appear. I've been out in the field this week. I've been behind enemy lines, you might put it. Not that we're in an actual war zone here in London, but there's certainly a propaganda war going on, and UCL sit right in the thick of it as far as it relates to the climate crisis and the green transition. And they ran this big event that I went to on Wednesday, local to national, achieving the green transition, hashtag love your planet. And this was a big collaboration between UCL and the Climate Reality Project, which was held in Logan Hall, which is in UCL's big brutalist Death Star of a building down in Bloomsbury in central London. So for those who don't know, UCL is University College London. They describe themselves as London's global university. They've got 51,000 students, 16,000 faculty. That actually came from one of the vice provosts on stage. I think there's a remarkable number of employees to have on staff for that number of students. I'm guessing that probably includes people studying for MAs and MScs and PhDs and that kind of thing. They look after billions in research funding. They are the source of billions of pounds worth of spin-outs from their research facilities. And they really boast about this unique global reach that they have, right? So they've talked about themselves as being a global university. They actually were really pushing this on stage. So they co-author more papers as an organisation with other academic institutions from G7 economies than any other UK-based academic institution. They're really hot on climate science, policy and communication. And this is very clearly an important conduit point for these ideas to get out into the wider academic, political and economic ecosystem. So UCL is right in the heart of all of this climate stuff that we're hearing about. The event, as I said, was done in partnership with the Climate Reality Project. Now, this is a really interesting organisation. They're basically a global activist network founded in 2006. They've got a network globally of 3.5 million people that they boast about, and they're all focused on delivering a just and sustainable transition to net zero. We're very familiar with all the language, and it's chaired by Al Gore, former US president and climate aficionado, and he opened up the session. I'm going to play a little clip of his opening remarks.
Hello, everyone. I'm really glad to join in welcoming all of you to this important gathering. And let me start by simply applauding the tremendous partnership between Climate Reality Europe, University College London, and the Climate Cafe for coming together to organize today's event. Together, all of us have just lived through the hottest year in recorded history here on Earth, a year that many scientists believe was the hottest year in 100,000 years and probably much more than that. We've experienced the destructive fires and smoke, the devastating floods and landslides, the widespread droughts, the melting ice and sea level rise, the much stronger storms that have caused so much damage, and many other horrific impacts caused by humanity's collective failure thus far to tackle the climate crisis with the urgency it obviously demands. We know what we've got to do. We need to stop using the sky as if it were an open sewer. We have to rapidly phase out the use of fossil fuels as quickly as possible and move then to replace them as quickly as possible with the clean energy solutions that are fully available to us today. The electricity is cheaper in almost the entire world. It doesn't have the co-pollution that kills many millions of people each year with the lung problems. It creates 3 times as many jobs per dollar spent or per pound spent compared to money put into the old dirty poisonous fossil fuel complex.
Do you think he really believes this, Ben, or is he just lying? Because, I mean, anybody that suggests that electricity is cheaper under net zero, is that just, oh, I don't know, I don't even know how to comment on that, actually.
Right, yeah. I mean, so my comeback to that is I think that everything he just said there is false, demonstrably false, every single bit of it. Maybe a couple of little nuggets of truth in and amongst. We certainly shouldn't be using the sky as a sewer. I believe that. But the rest of it, I think you can pretty much, oh God, I'm going to say debunk. I really don't like using that word, but I've done it now. But anyway, you can check out the full video. It's available on the YouTube. I shared it on the Rise UK Telegram channel as well. Also worth noting is the green badge. They had a little green badge on there, which is a bit like the SDG pin. And basically, to become part of this organisation, the Climate Reality Project, you end up getting personally trained by Al Gore, right? So there's a kind of big sort of cachet to that, and a bunch of the speakers were you could see them on stage getting all excited about who was wearing a green badge and who wasn't wearing a green badge, and there are a bunch of big hitters there, right? I mean, this is UCL, Central London, Al Gore. We're going to have a little look at the agenda here. It's far too much on there for you to read. You might want to take a screenshot or go back and pause it if you're not watching live, just to have a proper read through. I made it about 2/3 of the way through the day because it was just also predictable. It's basically wall-to-wall activists and no dissenting voices whatsoever. Loads of UCL people. So UCL has many, many, many people engaged around climate and green transition. It's a real hot area for them. And they had representatives from C40 cities. So coming up here, we've got Mark Watt from C40, who is the president of C40 cities, right? So when I say big hitters, these are the top people in these organizations pushing for the green transition, up on stage, trying to get us to move away from fossil fuels. There was actually a really interesting little bit of dissent. I said there was no dissent on stage. There was some dissent in that session. Someone asked a question at the end, a gentleman who I went to speak to. He's going to remain nameless. I don't know if he'd want me talking about him on the column necessarily, but he basically pointed out that all of this looks like a World Economic Forum and UN plot. And people in indigenous communities in places like South America see this as just another set of extractive industries pushed by the West. It's going to make a load of money for people in places like UCL and in their connected ecosystem. And when the lady, Preeti Parekh, started to answer the gentleman's question, the banner snapped shut on stage and shut her up. And it was like a little bit of divine intervention, which was quite enjoyable, actually, in and amongst all of the falsehoods coming from those who'd been booked to come and share the message on stage. The third big session was about the role of policy in driving the green transition. So again, some more big hitters here. Shirley Rodriguez, the Deputy Mayor of London, which is part of the C40 initiative. We had some senior people from the Tony Blair Global Institute. We also had Georgia Gold, who's the leader of Camden Council, who was particularly interesting. She talked about this as a social justice issue. I mean, this sort of neo-Marxist terminology has infected absolutely every component of this climate discussion. She also talked about using citizens' assemblies, which we've discussed at length here on the column, and that they allowed them to be bolder than they ever would have been alone, right? So they're using these assemblies as a way to push through progressive policies that they probably wouldn't have been able to get away with any other way. There's a big future leader, youthful kind of movement behind this. So lots of youthful enthusiasm. Obviously, it's at a university, so there's a lot of very young, very enthusiastic people basically saying, how do we get involved in global policy, right? So there's a pipeline of these really heavily indoctrinated young people going directly from academia straight into activism. Right. And a lot of these, they even had people on stage who had maybe like 2 or 3 years of semi-professional experience, and then they're off writing policy statements about the future of civilization. Really is a recipe for disaster. And that Future Leaders Network is one of the organizations that was mentioned. So coming back to Georgia Gold, actually, I think she's a really interesting character, right? And she probably came off one of these Future Leaders programs. She's been leading the council in Camden since 2017 when she was barely scraping her mid-30s. That's her in the middle there. Interesting for a few reasons. First of all, she brought up the 3CI organization that I spoke about here last week, right? And that I spoke about with reference to Bristol and West Yorkshire and Humberside. Right, so she's talking about it as well. So this is clearly going to be prominent. She said that organisation had identified a £206 billion funding gap across 10 cities around the UK, and that the only way to fill that gap, it's an extraordinary amount of money, right? £206 billion for 10 cities. The only way to solve that gap is through public-private partnership. Yeah, really interesting. She's also part of what I describe as a kind of multi-generational, liberal, progressive, globalist cabal, really, centred around North London, the Labour Party, the Guardian newspaper, places like that. Her parents were Philip Gold and Gail Rebuck. You can see them here. Philip Gold, actually Lord Gold, so the former ad executive, architect of New Labour, close advisor to Blair, Mandelson, Campbell. And when he left Number 10, he went to Freud Communications, we've spoken about a lot, because they run Gold's house. And actually a bunch of Blair's other people went to Freud Communications when he left Downing Street. And Georgia Gould's mother is Baroness Gail Rebuck, some quite high-powered people here. She's the former CEO of Penguin Random House, and she's still on the board, one of the biggest publishers in the world. She's on the board of The Guardian. She's the chair of Somerset House. She's on the management committee at Bertelsmann, the big German media company. And she's also a Labour peer in the UK House of Lords, Baroness Rebuck of Bloomsbury. Right, so Georgia Gold is an extremely well-connected and well-backed individual, and she's pushing some extremely dodgy policies on the people of Camden, and essentially using that as a bridgehead to get it out further afield into British society. And then finally, just to land on a guy that came to prominence at the back end of last year. This is Professor Mark Maslin, who's the Professor of Earth System Science at UCL. He spoke at numerous points during the day, and they say that the eyes are the window to the soul, and this man's eyes are as black as night when I look into them. Go and find some pictures and you'll see what I mean. As I said, he came to prominence last year. He was involved with the big Joe Brand-affiliated climate push, basically translating science into layperson speak. I found the whole thing quite condescending, to be honest with you. You can see him here in his red shoes on stage at the event on Wednesday, and basically saying that his advice for activists is to ignore disinformation and misinformation that's being pushed on social media. All criticism that you might receive is just bots or fossil fuel lobbyists. Don't read everything. It's not true. And the public can smell a fraud, which I thought was quite a remarkable thing for him to say, because he certainly smells like a fraud to me. And I think the public are actually onto this, because Nesta published this piece a couple of days ago, basically pointing out that an increasing number of people believe that the media exaggerates the impact of climate science, especially in the 16 to 24-year-old age group, which goes some way to telling me that this entire program is failing and that there is some hope for the future.
Okay, Ben, thank you very much for that. For